And welcome to the Deeptime Network, which is a project of the Deeptime Journey Network, a nonprofit in New Jersey in the United States. And we draw our members from 4 lineages, basically. A new story lineage, which is what Thomas Berry started, and he was very inspired by Teilhard de Chardin, and he took that on into a new story. And of course, Mary Evelyn will talk a lot about that. We have a Montessori lineage started by Maria Montessori back in the late 1940s, a big history lineage started by historians like David Christian, Fred Spear, Barry Rodriguez, and a Gaia systems theory lineage with people like Lynn Margulis and James Lovelock. So I'm looking at the audience here, and I see that we have in Australia, we have people, we have Pat Long, Ann Boyd, Di Shearer. From India, we have Robert Athakal, and I think Nagesh also is from the same organization, Taru Mitra, which works with 2,500 schools and has 250,000 members in India. From Canada, we've got Steve Dunn, who worked with Thomas Berry and the Port Burwell lectures. From Vermont, we have Linda Fitch and Claire, Joyce Rouse, the Earth Mama, Denise Tangney with the Guild for Spiritual Direction, Phil Gang with the Institute for Educational Studies, Brenda Lau from Hawaii, John Layden from the Philippines. Hi, John. The Center for Ecozoic Living. Carol Kilby from Canada, Sam Gornacha, who composed the Emergent Universe Oratorio, Judy Bauerlein, former president of the American Montessori Society, Michael Dorr, Montessori trainer and fabulous author, Ann Lynch from Springfield with her gang over there, the Sisters of St. Joseph, Joan Brown, Larry Edwards, Mary Southard, and many, many more. So we're hailing from all over the world. Why are we here tonight, or today, or this afternoon, depending on where you are? We are here to inquire deeply into who was Thomas Berry and why is he so important, and to do it with this pre-eminent Thomas Berry scholar, Mary Evelyn Tucker, and to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of Thomas Berry's passing, which happened on June 1, 2009, and to celebrate the publication of this biography. So before I introduce Mary Evelyn, I just have to say a couple of things about Zoom. One is you have a choice about how you can view this. If you drag your cursor to the top right, you will see speaker view or gallery view. You can click on either one of those and watch it either way. That is your choice. Also, after Mary Evelyn will talk, I will ask her some questions, and then we're going to open to questions from everybody. And what you do is drag your cursor down to the bottom, and you'll see a little Q&A box. So you just click on that and type your question into there. And then we will answer, or Mary Evelyn will answer as many as she can. And we will go till 8 o'clock, and then we'll talk about some resources available to you. So now, to introduce Mary Evelyn, the amazing Mary Evelyn. Mary Evelyn, we've known each other for 2 decades. Can you believe it? I know. 2 whole decades. And seeing each other in so many different contexts. And there was that just amazing time when you were in Princeton teaching for a semester with the Princeton Environmental Institute. And we used to have dinner every single week, either go out to a restaurant or sit home around the fire and put our feet up by the fire. and just enjoy our company and have amazing conversations. So Mary Evelyn teaches at the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies and Yale Divinity School, where she and her husband, John Grimm, direct the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. Mary Evelyn and John worked closely with Thomas Berry for over 30 years as his students, editors, and literary executors, and are the managing trustees of the Thomas Berry Foundation. Just to name some of the books, these classic Thomas Berry books that Mary Evelyn and John worked on: Dream of the Earth, Evening Thoughts, The Sacred Universe, The Great Work, The Christian Future, and The Fate of the Earth, to name a few. So let's launch in now. Mary Evelyn, who was Thomas Berry and why is he so important?
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you all who are listening, many of you dear friends also over the decades. I wish I could embrace each one of you, and I know Thomas is somehow with us at this moment too. It's a very exciting moment to, I think, take in after his books, after his inspiration for Journey of the Universe and so on. Who was he as a person? And that's what John Grimm, my husband, and I, along with Andrew Angel, have tried to do in this new biography. This took us more than 10 years, and many of you out there helped, Steve Dunn especially. I really thank you. Because everyone has their version of how they knew Thomas, and even those who met him briefly. He was so charismatic. But I want to just say I was fortunate to meet him when I came back from Japan. I went to Japan to teach at a university there, women's college, and it was after the 60s and into the 70s when there was tremendous political upheaval here. And I said, I'm not coming home after Nixon was elected the second time until he's out of office. Sound familiar? In any case, I wrote to Thomas when I was in Japan to ask him for his book on Buddhism. And the miracle of my life is that he wrote back. And when I got back from Japan, my first instinct was to go and meet him, which I did in early February in 1975. I remember everything about the day, the light coming in over the Hudson River, the beauty of that river with its currents, its estuary feeling, the Palisades, and so on. It's one of those times, we all know it, I think, when you know you have met your teacher. And of course, through Thomas, I also met John Grimm, because we were both students of his at Fordham. This was a remarkable community that he created around the great red oak, if you will, this 400-year oak tree along the Hudson River, standing right next to this old Victorian house that was his Riverdale Center. And at Fordham, he had brought together remarkable people to study religions of India, shamanism and indigenous traditions like John did, Buddhism like Brian Brown did, the journey symbol, Lauren Isley. I mean, who could imagine the range of things that he helped to mentor? And that's because he kept reading and reading his whole life. As many of you know, he came out of Greensboro, North Carolina. The first 14 years of his life were spent there, and the last 14 years of his life. He went to study at St. Mary's College in Maryland, first the prep school and then a year of the college. And he finally decided he wanted to enter a monastic order where he knew he could think and reflect. As you know, he said, well, either I'm going to a monastery or to a prison because I need that time to reflect. And he would laugh, tremendous sense of joy with Thomas, unstoppable. He went to study at Catholic University and moved towards eventually the Asian religions. Went to China and studied Confucianism, met Thomas Berry, met Ted de Berry, the great Confucian scholar there. Began to teach at Seton Hall first, then St. John's University, and finally Fordham, where over 15 years he established a remarkable history of religion program. There's no place in the country, in North America, that had a program like that, even today. So between the program that he created and Riverdale Center, where we would meet once a month over this period of time to encourage talks, conversation, reflections. And that was through the Teilhard Association that John and I would organize these meetings, and we'd have potlucks and so on. So I just want to say, this is a person, as we know, who is deeply intellectual, driven to understand the cultures and religions of the world, from Asia and the West to indigenous traditions. And the Riverdale Center had books from all of these places. He moved deeply into Teilhard's work and was president of the association before John took over and myself as vice president. Teilhard was critical to his thinking. Without Teilhard, there would be no universe story, because for Brian, John, myself, and Thomas, Teilhard is a foundation note, a bass note, the music, the symphony of the human phenomenon, saying that this vast evolutionary universe that came from this extraordinary flaring forth had spirit and matter from the very beginning. That's Teilhard's extraordinary contribution, that it evolves to greater complexity and greater consciousness. As you know, Thomas took that and made it into a story, accessible, and with the brilliance of Brian in the universe story and then narrating Journey of the Universe, the hope is that that story will bring to all of us in this very critical moment a sense of deep time perspective. That's why I love this tremendous network that Jennifer is bringing together. So deep time, deep imagination, and an ecological sensibility that we are birthed from these earth systems, a cosmological sensibility that we are birthed from cosmic processes, from star burst and star dust. So I want to just say, more than 40 years ago, Thomas had this vision of the world's religions, of a story emerging, but he also had a sense we must get this into education. And so to honor the work that many of you are doing through the Montessori schools, teachers, networks, and through Jennifer's deep commitment to Montessori education, Thomas, Brian, and Jennifer have all spoken at the major meetings of the Montessori teachers. And what an extraordinary philosophy this is, and how congruent it is with Thomas's and Teilhard's sense of the universe is the foundation note. This is what we have to give, not only to children, but to all peoples, that is what orients us and grounds us and nurtures us. So as a special tribute to Maria Montessori in this particular conversation, I want to just hold up a passage that Thomas wrote in the great work. It was published, as you know, in 1999, and he was speaking very early on, before that, about Maria's work and the importance of her education, philosophy. So this is actually in the essay that you all know called Meadow Across the Creek, and it's on page 16. There's another reference to Maria Montessori on 183. But this passage is so beautiful because it sets a tone of who Thomas was. And then maybe we can think about opening up to questions, because I could talk on and on. But we want to honor the ancestors here, and Maria is one of these ancestors. So here's what Thomas says. In speaking about the education of the 6-year-old child, she notes in her book, To Educate the Human Potential, that only when the child is able to identify its own center with the center of the universe does education really begin. For the universe, she says, is an imposing reality. It is an answer to all questions. This is a quote. We shall walk together on this path of life, for all things are part of the universe and are connected with each other to form one whole unity. This is Maria. It sounds like Thomas, doesn't it? This comprehensive context enables, Maria's quote, the mind of the child to become centered, to stop wandering in an aimless quest for knowledge. Maria observes how this experience of the universe creates in children admiration and wonder, how this enables children to unify their thinking. In this manner, children learn how all things are related and how the relationship of things to one another is so close that, quote, no matter what we touch, an atom or a cell, we cannot explain it without knowledge of the wide universe. The difficulty, says Thomas, is that with the rise of the modern sciences, we began to think of the universe as a collection of objects rather than a communion of subjects. One of his most famous lines comes after he is quoting Maria Montessori. What an inspiration she was, you see, for him. So we could talk on and on about his life, his influence on many people, and the deep gratitude that we feel in celebrating him 10 years later. But I just would love to open it up for Jennifer to ask some questions and to hear what's on your mind, all of you who are out there. Thank you for taking time to be with us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that, Mary Evelyn, and for that connection with Maria Montessori. So important. So I just wanted to inquire a bit more into, how Thomas moved from Western history to Asian religions that then opened up his pathway to really opening up to the whole universe. And then this idea that he says, and you quote in the book, or I quote from the book, about that the universe is the primary liturgy, the primary scripture. Can you say more what Thomas Berry meant by that?
Great question. So let me begin with that last part. The universe is a primary liturgy. As Steve Dunn would know, and those who are in monastic orders, this tremendous sense of prayer 5 times a day, from dawn to dusk and even at evening time. So the liturgy, as Thomas would say over and over again, of the monastic life from a Benedictine lineage and so on, is weaving the human into the liturgy of the day, of the seasons, of the cosmos itself. And that was a physical and symphonic grounding for Thomas, just as we heard about the child being grounded in the universe. That's what liturgy, the divine office, chanting through the day meant. A human could know where they were, where they belonged. And he would often say, dawn and dusk are the magical times of day, you see. So if we talk about how he moved in his life, the Christian tradition was very basic to him, was very orienting, and why Teilhard opened it up and exploded it into the science and cosmology. The reasons why he was attracted to Asian religions, I think, also explain how he went from the traditions to cosmology, from religion to ecology to cosmology. If you take his love of Confucianism, which I hope to write more on, just what is the spirituality of Confucianism? Du Weiming, the great Confucian scholar, is one of the eloquent spokespersons for this tradition. So Confucianism, as many of you know, is the microcosm of the human related to the macrocosm of the universe. So a Confucian cosmology is just that the human is not interdependent, is not isolated, independent, but interdependent. So you've got the concentric circles of family, of society, all around the individual and supporting, and the rippling effect of the individual on family, society, education, politics, nature, and the cosmos itself. So the human is the person who completes heaven and earth, meaning the cosmos and nature itself. And that the human is the co-creator with cosmos and earth. That's the triad for Confucianism. So you can see how inspiring that was for Thomas. And two of his essays have been published along those lines in Confucian Spirituality that I edited with Du Ming. But his depth understanding of Confucianism was remarkable, almost unparalleled. And the final traditions that really influenced him, of course, and he had a whole room at Riverdale, were the indigenous traditions, especially Native Americans. That's why John got started on shamanism and Native American traditions. And that too is clearly saying the story of the cosmos is where the human dwells. A cosmovision is what holds us, sustains us, supports us, and guides us. So that's how he got from the religions to cosmology.
Yeah.
Because cosmology is in these traditions, but he brought it in dialogue with science.
Right, absolutely. Thank you for that. And it's interesting in your book, this idea that he keeps bringing out of focusing on reality itself. So I'm going to quote something from the book where in the Riverdale Center, where he describes the center, he says, it's not a meditation center. It's not a place for abstract intellectual analysis. It is rather an atmosphere of depth reflection on the great mysteries of reality and how humans are being spiritually transformed by their experience of these mysteries. So, it's like the sacredness of reality itself.
Yes,
Like
I think that,
idea. Yeah.
right. And it's why, of course, the physical setting was so magnificent, overlooking this estuary of the Hudson River and the 200 million year old Palisades. So the geology was there, the deep time, the movement of this great watershed system, and New York so close. So the physical presence, that old house next to the tree that he dedicated the Dream of the Earth to that tree. So it was true. He wasn't trying, it wasn't a self-help, it wasn't a new age, it wasn't a meditation center, as important as those were. And he didn't criticize other types of centers. He was trying to carve a space for something new, for something creative. Not easy. And that's exactly why we brought people together for these Saturday gatherings to support him, to be in conversation with people dialectically and sometimes critically that would sharpen his thinking and his creativity. So that sense of it was a communion experience to be there. Brian Swim said, has often said, there's no community that he experienced that really compared to the Riverdale community. And that's because of his charisma and his sense of a porous, loving, creative, like the roaring generosity of the sun that Brian refers to in Hidden Heart. That's who he was. And there wasn't an ego, that there wasn't a barrier, and that creativity and joy and love. We would have these amazing evenings on Good Friday. We would listen to Bach's or St. Matthew Passion and have ratatouille afterwards. And so it's those meals, it was wine, it was conversations. John's year there that he called the golden year, the year before we were married by Thomas, 1978. They would have long lunches and I would join them for dinner, and they were so rich. The music was always part of it, and Brian Brown was at the center that same year. Very, very special times with Thomas.
Wow. And I actually personally was able to experience some of that myself when he invited me down to North Carolina when I was working on the Universe Story trilogy. And he spent an entire weekend with me just nurturing my soul. It was amazing.
Yes. And
in the Hermitage.
Yeah.
That's where I stayed, in the Hermitage.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yes.
I saw the picture of it in the book.
So generous. And
Yeah.
Then in the summers at Riverdale, he would pull together even more people, like 100 people, because they could stay at the retreat center that was next door to his Riverdale Center, owned by the Passionist. And so he would have, he did one with Brian Swim, but before that he did one on the city. What is New York City? He did the theme of contemporary spirituality and so on. And he would put these together over several months, and this whole huge table in the opening room of Riverdale would be covered with books, and he would prepare lecture after lecture. Some of these became the Riverdale Papers, which eventually we edited into his books and his essays. But what a long process, and always dialogical, always in conversation.
Yeah. So we just finished a spiritual leadership study group on the network. And I would say a big part of the conversation had to do with the word sacred. So how do we think about this word sacred? We had a certain idea about it in the past, but Thomas Berry's idea really blows this open completely. And what more can you say about that? What does the word sacred mean inside of a Thomas Berry perspective?
Well, we could spend the rest of our time together contemplating that. But, all of these questions are so helpful, Jennifer. And this one, I think, is, hopefully it's going to be one of the most generative questions going forward. What is the sacred? Because by and large, it's been marginalized, pushed to the side by a consumer-oriented society, by reductionist, materialist science, by an educational system in its secular form will have nothing to do with it. So the inheritance for our students is very schizophrenic. You've got science here telling the truth and religion here doing something very different. And that's why I was very struck. One of his two last books, the very last one was The Sacred Universe, which Columbia published. And in editing these books, we would think through which essay should be the title for the book. And it blew me away when Columbia said, well, why don't we have Sacred Universe for the title? Now, this is a secular press. They publish books on religion, but I was very startled because Sacred Universe, what does that mean? And I think that is, I'm repeating, but to understand that in both a Teilhardian and a Berry framework and what Brian's done on this, but on our own experiences, I think we have to bring this forward. We are dwelling in great mystery, in a great unknown, in the great holy, and it's being birthed all around us day by day. Those of us who are in springtime right now, I rejoice each morning with the bird song, that it's not a silent spring, they're coming back. I rejoice with the sunrise, and I pray to it every morning and in the four directions, and with water, and with all those people who are working for transformative change. This sensibility that we are surrounded by great fecundity, the fecundity of transformation that is in the natural world is almost boundless and a source of great inspiration. And that's why it's so critical that we respond to our deep feelings about the sacred and the ecological work that we need to do, because we are standing on, dwelling amidst the sacred earth community.
Yeah, thank you. And then he called himself, rather than calling himself a theologian, he called himself a geologian. Yeah. Talk about that.
Well, that was an amazing moment because he was flying back from the Seychelles for a conference that he had been at. And as some of you might recall or know, he was flying over the Nile River 30,000 feet up. And he looked down and, this geography, this bioregion just exploded in his mind's eye. And this notion that we are biocultural beings, you see, is part of what we're trying to absorb. We're biocultural beings. And he was trying to get at, well, how do I describe myself as a cultural historian, as a geologist, not really. And he was trying to put this together because a theologian really refers to a Christian theologian. Even myself as a historian of religion, and John, it's very different to do the study of religion. So for Thomas, the geo gives the feeling of earth, clearly. And the theo, the theologian part of it, the logos part of it, every element of life has an inner ordering principle. That's what a logos is. And it can be an incarnational principle, but the Greek sensibility was that inner ordering principle gives intentionality, gives yearning, gives a sense of purpose to things. So that's why he combined this earth and logos idea, to be a geologian. It's a marvelous word. Everybody loves it.
My son read that. He was quite entranced with it.
Yes. Indeed. And I think one of the things, maybe just to add to that, is, he would say we're stuck because we're between two stories. And I would just add to that, we're particularly mired right now because we have a sense that science tells the empirical facts about evolution, and our religions haven't quite caught up to the meaning dimension of evolution. So science will say, and even a scientist who said at Yale, after doing Journey of the Universe, why did you make this film? And I said, well, very tentatively, possibly to consider that there might be meaning and purpose here. These two scientists went crazy. There's no meaning and purpose. You see, it's random. It's purposeless. Now, I like to say it's random and purpose going together in this messy and unfolding universe. But clearly, the meaning is in the universe. It's not just in the human to give it out there. This is why the Confucian sensibility is that everything, the fecundity of life, is saturated with meaning, with beauty, with integrity. And the human is supposed to have an authentic response, authenticity being one of the great virtues for Confucianism. All of this was inspiring Thomas, that meaning and purpose is there in the universe for us to discover and relate to, be part of. So that's what he was getting at, just as Teilhard was getting at.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we've got some questions that are already coming in. In his book, The Great Work, tell us what is the great work according to, if you can, is there a way to encapsulate what the great work is for this time?
Right. So this wonderful book, you see it in many, many stores, of course, The Great Work. So his first book in 1988, he was, by the way, his greatest work was all done after he was 60. He's 70 years old when he publishes The Dream of the Earth. And onward and onward, how hopeful is that? But the idea, if we set it in simple and direct forms, we need a great story for the great work. Now, the story we understand as this evolutionary story, thrilling, dynamic, transformative, violent as well, and threaded through with surprise and the things that Brian tells us about that lights us up. But to what purpose is the universe story? Not just to be a beautiful story, an interesting story to fascinate us. No, it's to be a functional story, a functional cosmology that actually lights up this deep connection to say we are co-creators aligned with these creative processes. So literally, for example, the great work is many, many things. It's teaching, like the Montessori teachers. It's NGO work. It's church work, and on and on. It's healthcare work. But right now, aligning ourselves with the processes of the universe means alternative energies, solar power, wind power, geothermal power. This is aligning with the universe. So the great work is to say everyone has a part in this alignment for next generations. And it's why I like to say to young people now who are bursting forth with their creativity, this is an intergenerational handshake. We are giving you to do your work. And they are so ready. They are so creative. Our students at Yale are unbelievably inspirational to us because they want to enter into their great work, and they are.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. And so many people who are on this webinar are also doing amazing and great work in so many different ways.
Definitely.
So we have some questions here, and Phil Gang had sent in a question about Maria Montessori and if there was any other commentary.
But that's what I answered at the very beginning.
Yeah, but you answered that already. So thanks very much for that.
Yeah.
And okay, so then we have a question from Carol Kilby. Would you say Thomas's work is contributing to the this is interesting, to the evolution or devolution of the church? Or would it be better said that the universe story is contributing to the evolution of a new consciousness? This is Carol Kilby. She's a retired clergy in the United Church of Canada. And she's the author of Out In, On the Fringe, Dancing from Christianity to Evolutionary Spirituality and Cosmic Beatitudes. So, evolution or devolution of the church, Mary Evelyn?
Oh, what a great question. Let's have a glass of wine over that one. Evolution is absolutely necessary in all of these institutions, the church, politics, education, and economics, as Thomas would say. So there's no question that evolution is challenging to many branches of Christianity and so on, but it's why Teilhard is so critical to this change. And I think if we want to engage the next generation who's been brought up on evolution and ecology and are very excited by it, that we have to move this forward. So my sense is, I'll try and be brief with these questions because I want to hear as many as we can, is both evolution and ecology are brother and sister right now. They're necessary for all of these religions to move forward. And it's not going to be without a struggle, as we know, but I think it can happen. And it is already. And we can talk about that further. But thank you for that question. It's so important. It's so important.
Yeah. Thank you, Carol. Okay, Denise Tangney asked the question, what relationship did Thomas have with the Earth Charter?
Okay, so good question. As you may know, I was part of the drafting committee for the Earth Charter, which was almost 10 years in drafting. 1992, it came out of the Earth Summit in Rio. Gorbachev and Maurice Strong said we need an ethics, we need principles. The 10 Commandments is what Gorbachev said for ecology, ecological protection, and environmental and economic development. So economics and ecology, that was the dynamics in first world, developing world issues. So, and I would go to these meetings and I would talk closely and intensely to Thomas. And so back and forth, he made certainly contributions. And the most important one I would say was this. In a small meeting with Due Ming, the Confucian scholar, and Eric Chasen, an evolutionary scientist, who's done amazing work, cosmic evolution and so on, we came up with the phrases that are in the preface to the prologue of the Earth Charter, and that is, we are part of a vast evolving universe. Earth, our home, is alive with a myriad community of life. Now, so cosmology is a base note for the Earth Charter because of Thomas and because of these other two, a scientist and a Confucian scholar, who agreed that that was the base note, because Du Ming knew Thomas Berry very well. And the other part, this sense of Earth is alive, was because of indigenous peoples. This is their cosmovision. And in 1997, when the Earth Charter was presented in Rio and Gorbachev held up this version of it, this draft, which had these lines in it, indigenous peoples there were weeping because they said it was the first time their worldview, their cosmovision, was included in an international document like that. So Thomas certainly had input through those of us who were helping to draft the charter over those years.
Wow, thank you. We've got a question here from Richard Olrog. He says, my concern is that the amazing ideas associated with these new story movements are popular with a relatively small audience from a global perspective. The urgency for the need for a change in consciousness is evident. So how do you scale up the communication of these ideas to the broader general public?
Thank you. So important. So that's why we made Journey of the Universe over 10 years, the film, the book that Yale published, these conversations that I did with scientists and environmentalists to talk about the great story and the great work. That's what the conversations are about. And also the online classes on Journey of the Universe through Coursera, Yale Coursera. So the Journey of the Universe was on PBS for 3 years. Several million people watched it that way, 3 or 4 at least million. As you know, it won an Emmy and so on. And now through the online classes, which are free for audit, they're 6 week long, they're pretty accessible. There's one on the Journey film and book, one on the conversations, and one on the worldview of Thomas Berry. Now, there's 24,000 people watching those around the world. Yale's been very supportive of them. And we've had them translated, the whole course is translated into Chinese. And we're going to Beijing in the fall for Du Ming's 80th birthday. And we're going to do a presentation at the Yale China Center there and bring this out in its Chinese version. The film is already in Chinese. It's in Spanish. In Barcelona, just in a couple of weeks, they're going to have a whole event for a week long, having Journey online. The book's been translated into Italian, Spanish, French, Turkish, Chinese, Korean, Indonesian. So that's a pretty worldwide basis to grow from, and that's exactly what we want to do. We're moving forward, hiring another person part-time, but to help do that precisely along the lines of what you're saying, because scaling up is everything. And we're happy for your help. We have a newsletter for Journey of the Universe. You know, you can sign up for it and so on. So this is collective. It's why Jennifer's work and her network is also extremely important, and so many of you out there. I just wish I had at least 30 hours of a day to do this work.
Yeah, okay, we've got some more questions. And everybody else, if you have questions, just put them right up on the Q&A. Let's see. Here's an anonymous submission. In a recent writing by Sister Miriam McGillis of Genesis Farm, she quoted Thomas as advising that we need the wisdom endowed by 4 major periods of human creativity: the wisdom of indigenous people and the Paleolithic period, the wisdom of women in the Neolithic period, the wisdom of classical religions and cultures in more recent and familiar history, wisdom of empirical discoveries, current era of science. Are there references you can suggest to help us follow Thomas's understanding of these major periods of human creativity, including this Neolithic period and the particular role of women?
Yeah, well, there's in several of his writings, he elaborates these particular time periods, including in Great Work, Dream of the Earth, He has an article on women in the Christian future and the fate of Earth. So a lot of this is spread out through his writings. And he's simply trying to say he ends up with science as a wisdom tradition, you see, which is why universe story is so critical to his thinking. But he says all the world's religions have this wisdom, which is why we were trying to midwife, to birth these religions into their ecological phase through the conferences at Harvard, through the Forum on Religion and Ecology. And that was deeply inspired exactly by this question, that the religions need to retrieve and reevaluate and reconstruct their traditions for their ecological wisdom and sensibilities. And of course, he had a very deep feeling for Indigenous peoples. There's a chapter in this biography on Indigenous traditions and how they influenced him and how he influenced them. Orrin Lyons, who was just honored for his 80th birthday in upstate New York, was very close to Thomas, and there's a picture of him in the book. He's a great member of the Haudenosaunee Nation and a lacrosse leader, and others up in Canada honored him and called him grandfather. So these are absolutely critical influences, all of them. And for women, he was challenged up in Canada at Port Burwell by Professor Chung, a professor at Union Seminary, and kind of pushed even more into this sense of feminism and whatnot. And he moved. He of course, so many women were close to him and loved his company and so on. So he had a tremendous feeling for the feminine. And he absolutely believed in their leadership, their capability, their voices, and so on. So thank you for that question. It's threaded throughout his writings, these influences.
And I think Orla Hazra's question is related to the one that you just answered about, would Thomas Berry have considered the fourfold wisdom conversation, religion, science, women, and indigenous?
That's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. Yeah. Yeah.
So we have a question here from Peter Walsh. Thank you for this wonderful celebration of Thomas Berry. My question, in my less than comprehensive familiarity with all of Thomas Berry's writings, it seems that he doesn't engage with baptism and Eucharist and how these might reconcile with and indeed enhance the principles of creation, spirituality, theology.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Orla, by the way, for, of course, bringing that forward nicely in relation to the other question. So obviously the sacraments are part of this weaving of ourselves into the cosmos. And it's why it was so important for him from his monastic tradition that all of these sacraments have their cosmological dimension. So every time we would have a baptism at the Riverdale Center or in another setting with Thomas, he would bring this beautiful prayer that John had found of an introduction of a child to the cosmos. It's a magnificent prayer, and it's a prayer where the child is lifted into the four directions and into the hills, the mountains, the rivers that ground and steady a child, just as Maria Montessori said. So he would always bring this cosmological indigenous prayer into baptism, and he would hold up water as this is a water planet. How precious is this water? So being baptized with this great gift of earth was something he was deeply aware of. And certainly if we take communion, I mean, we were at many masses and communions with him over the years. And while he had a very natural and casual sense about him, even in doing liturgy, as you might know. And it was very inclusive. Everyone can take something of the bread and the wine and whatnot. But that sacrificial dimension of a Eucharist, of giving back from the fruits of human hands and the gifts of the earth was essential to his understanding of Eucharist, a thanksgiving for the gift giving of earth. So sacrifice, gift giving, communion together, that was all part of his sense of what is a Eucharist. And we need to do a lot more of that, by the way. So
Yeah.
thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Peter. Okay, Brenda Lau asks, having worked with Thomas Berry so closely for so many years, what do you see as the next steps in order to bring his vision to a world today in so much need of redemption? Thank you. It's from Sister Brenda Lau.
Well, these words, as you know, Brenda, were contested by him as well. And I know you mean redemption in a very broad sense. I'm taking it. But he had this sense we have to emphasize creation, not redemption, because redemption would often mean that takes us outside of Earth and Earth systems to a salvific system and so on. But I think so he would say, I think, in response to your very penetrating question, is that we've got to come back to creation. We've got to come back to the earth. And it's why the work that Matthew Fox did on creation spirituality has been very important over time. And he too was ahead of his time. So I would say those who are working within the church to make liturgy cosmological, make the sacraments cosmological, just as we said. They are already, but we need to make them more explicitly so. It's a beautiful book by Anne and Jeffrey Rowthorne on the liturgy that's for every day of the year. They've got a saying, a prayer, a song, that's very, very rich. So I recommend that highly. But I also think we need to bring our religious leaders and laity and our educational system to embrace this sensibility that we are on a great journey in this 14 billion year universe. And we absolutely need to light up the ecological imagination, the cosmological imagination as to what this means. We're developing this new, it's like a fifth sense for us. We've got our four senses and some, but this cosmological, ecological sensibility is, in many ways, it's old with indigenous peoples and it's new for modern peoples. I want to mention that Brian Swim has a new edition of Hidden Heart of the Universe coming out in the fall. We're going to celebrate that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, at the American Academy of Religion. I'm reading it right now, proofreading it. And I'm so struck precisely because of this good question, because he has all kinds of exercises that get us to think about where we are in the cosmos and feel it, embody it, sense it. So I think we can do, that's what Maria Montessori is helping us to do.
Yes,
well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for making that connection to Maria Montessori. She's so much about that. Okay, there's John. We've got some great questions here. Let's see. Nora Bolton, are there books like Living Cosmology for other faith groups?
Wonderful question. So Living Cosmology, as some of you will recall, came from a conference we did here at Yale of Christian responses to Journey of the Universe. And we also did a conference at Chautauqua, I forget the year, but Chautauqua Institute in upstate New York. And there's lectures there that are online for all the world's religions in responding to Journey of the Universe. I gave one on Confucianism, John gave one on indigenous traditions, and so on. So while there's not books explicitly, those lectures I think are quite valuable, one on Hinduism and Jainism and Buddhism and so on, and how they relate to, are congruent with Journey of the Universe. And in fact, we built these traditions that we had studied for so many years into Journey. There's a very complex structure there we can talk about another time, but the interdependence of Buddhism, the lack of ego to eco, that's all in there. The sense of, are we the heart mind of heaven and earth? That's Confucian. That's what Brian says at the very end. So these traditions are there. They're living traditions, and they're part of a journey of the universe as well.
Great. Mike Bell from Canada. Mike Bell lived with Thomas Berry as a Passionist. And he asks, how do we bring the complexities of Thomas's teaching down to the community level? And by the way, that's exactly what Mike Bell is doing in his life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mike, and wonderful to have you here, and thanks for all your great work. And I think that's why we did the film to make, and we did the online classes and so on. So some of this is happening. The responses to the online classes have been quite amazing. We had you can see some of them online, but an 18-year-old high school student from Ohio wrote and said how this changed her life, how moved she was by Journey. We've had our students at Yale who've lost hope, who are sometimes in despair with the environmental questions. I've had them in my office last spring weeping and saying Journey of the Universe actually turned them around and renewed their hope and sense of empowerment. So, Mike, this is the question that we share with you. It's why we give talks in lots of different places and so on. And it's going to take time. But I think almost everywhere people do respond to Journey or Thomas's ideas, and there's lots more we can do. And it's why I'm saying it once again, Montessori education, but education with Jennifer's great books and with Betty Kiesloff's book for young people too. We've made a lot of progress in a fairly short period of time. Thomas has only been gone 10 years, and I think a lot has happened, and with the work of many of you, and we thank you, Mike, and Steve Dunn up there in Canada. His work, I really want to give a shout out. Steve Dunn, who set up the Elliott Allen Center at the University of Toronto, trained, I wish I had this number right, but I don't know if it's 12 PhDs who really understand Thomas's work. Heather Eaton, Anne-Marie Dalton, were, although she did her work at Catholic University, but a great group of people in Canada at Port Burwell, where Thomas would come every summer. He was on the television, CBC, with a conversation, Befriending the Earth, with another Jesuit. And so a lot has happened up in Canada too, that I want to give a shout out. Next, June 1st, this coming June 1st, in Korea, they are starting a Korean Thomas Berry Association, which is fabulous. I met with them back in the fall, and they have translated so many of almost all of Thomas's books into Korean, and they're working already on the biography to get it into Korea. There's no country in Asia that has a better understanding. It's fabulous, very exciting. So keep going, all of us.
And here we've got a question from John Layden, who's a priest in the Philippines, a Colombian priest. And he says, I'm feeling the presence of Father Dennis Edwards, who recently passed.
Yeah.
My perception is that Dennis filled out the theology that the new cosmology is generating. How do you feel about this?
Wonderful question. And yes, Dennis was a great loss in his recent death. And certainly there are theologians who are taking that in very explicit ways, like Dennis, into theological language. You see, theological language wasn't Thomas's language because he wanted to speak to everyone. But so I just would say yes, 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 and blessings on Dennis Edwards' work. And also Jack Haught, a great scholar of Teilhard and putting this into theological language, very accessible. Kathy Duffy at Chestnut Hill has just done another wonderful book on Teilhard and these theological implications. So, and there's a wonderful book by Dan Scheid at Duquesne called The Cosmic Common Good, which has Thomas in it and Teilhard and Buddhism and indigenous traditions, and threads this through as well. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. So glad you're able to participate. So that brings us to 8 o'clock. And I can't believe how the time just flies. I don't know how but this is what happens when you're talking about or pondering the deep mysteries of reality, right? um, so now we're just going to talk about some resources. And Mary Evelyn, do you want to talk about the journey? And I just want to say about the Journey of the Universe MOOC, which Mary Evelyn's been touching on a little bit, and she'll say again, these are foundational for everything that we're doing on the network. I mean, really, everybody who's on the network should take these courses, the MOOC courses, the Journey of the Universe MOOCs, and there's one on Thomas Berry as well. So why don't you talk about that, Mary Evelyn?
Well, yes. So, and we're going to put up a little list of links, not a lot, but Jennifer will put it up after this. Maybe it'll be there tomorrow morning or whatever, but we've already prepared it by and large. So these MOOCs, massive open online classes, they're pretty user-friendly to work with and so on. And because they are accessible around the planet, people were using it in different parts of the planet. And we've had people like Kathleen Degnan at Iona College who's constructed whole classes using these courses. And then the students come in to class and discuss and write papers and whatnot. So there's many ways these can be used in discussion groups, in communities, in churches and synagogues. However, this is all open source. That's what we're trying to get at. So the online classes is a big resource. The one on Thomas Berry might be useful. The Journey of the Universe, there's all of these sources for the film and the book and conversations that we've mentioned. The Forum on Religion and Ecology, there's a large website that we're going to be redoing over the summer because it's 20 years old and there's a lot of information, but we want to make it more accessible. And I really want to mention one thing we have put up. So on the Thomas Berry website, there's a page just for the biography. And there's a page there that says how you can get a discount for the biography, 30% discount or whatever. But on that website as well, there's a place that we have listed the engaged projects inspired by Thomas Berry. We will put that link there too. Many of you, Mary Southard did such wonderful work with John Surratt and so on, is listed up there. Mike Bell's listed, Steve Dunn is listed. And please add your examples to that list because it's not exhaustive by any means, and it will continue to grow and inspire other people. So, and there's other ways you could participate, certainly through newsletters from both Journey of the Universe and the Forum on Religion and Ecology. But if you decide you even would like to become a community mentor for one of these courses online, which means you just go in as an instructor kind of thing, and you help people to get these ideas, to understand them further. And so you make comments online like an instructor who's working with these students online, and people really appreciate that sense of someone's watching their work and helping to monitor it a bit. So think about that too, becoming a community mentor.
That's great. Thank you, Mary Evelyn. And then regarding the Deeptime networks, sorry to throw all these resources at you all, but there is a lot of stuff available now, which is just great. We're offering online professional development for teachers on the network. And so we're working with really amazing trainers, a lot of Montessori trainers, a lot of other trainers. So if you're a teacher, you know other teachers who really want to get immersed in this worldview and let it breathe through all of their teaching, tell them to come here, and they'll find out about other training programs that they can participate in as well to get certified. And then we offered that spiritual leadership study group in the spring. We'll be doing that again in the fall and the spring. But all of these things are, work beautifully with the Journey of the Universe MOOCs. And as I said before, the journey of the universe really is so foundational for everything that we're doing. So it's almost like, it's almost like the first course you need to do, and then come over to us.
Sorry, can I just mention one other thing? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Or finish what you're going to say and I'll come back.
And then I was going to say, we have memberships on the network, so you can become a basic member, and then you can put up resources, share your resources with other people, and then you can make comments on resources, you can add events. There's just lots of ways to participate. And then as a premium member, you can get access to most of the courses, and we've got a lot more courses coming. So there's just a lot happening and a lot coming. So what were you going to say?
Oh, sorry. So I was going to just mention, we're all concerned these days about diversifying and diversity and ethnicity and race and gender and all of these kinds of things. And I wanted to highlight that in the Journey conversations, we were very conscious of this, in including the voices of African Americans, Latinos, and Asian folks in those conversations. And we've had wonderful conversations back and forth with Carl Anthony, who's done a beautiful book on race and the hidden earth and the hidden narrative of race. He acknowledges his tremendous debt to Thomas Berry and so on. But I wanted especially to underscore, and by the way, next year we're going to give Carl Anthony, an African-American architect, urban leader, the Thomas Berry Award out in California at the California Institute of Integral Studies. But the other thing I wanted to mention is in the MOOCs, we put in new little sections that Brian did for most of the lectures that we were giving. And Brian is so modest and so dynamic that it's very important, I think, for us to realize that Brian, while trained in science, also has indigenous background. So his father is from the Salish people of British Columbia. We met him over many years, an extraordinary person. So this combination, if you will, of Brian's understanding, broadly speaking, of traditional environmental knowledge and scientific knowledge, it's a new braiding, somewhat along the lines of what Robin Kimmerer is doing in braiding sweetgrass. So I just wanted to put that into the mix of what Brian's work, what Journey of the Universe is this braiding of different voices into our glimpse of the universe story.
Oh, great. Thank you, Mary Evelyn. So I think we're ready to close, and I just want to read a very, very short poem by Thomas Berry called Morningside Cathedral. It's in the book, page 135. And it's just beautiful to sort of bring together our time together tonight, or this afternoon, or this morning, wherever you are. And here it is. The meaning of the moment and the healing of the wound are there in a single cry, a throat open wide, for the wild sacred sound come down from the beginning of time.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so Thomas wrote that in response to the solstice performance by Paul Winter in 1983. So thank you all. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mary Evelyn, for taking this time to be with us today, tonight, this afternoon, this morning. And enjoy, everybody. Feel free to write, to us at hello@dtnetwork.org, and we'll get these resources out to you. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, for your extraordinary work. You have a new interview role in you. I love it. I wish we could all clap for you and your role for what you're doing with Deeptime Journey Network. Deep, deep thanks.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Okay, everybody, have a good night. Yep, bye-bye.
Bye.